Hey guys, welcome back for the final reading of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. It has been so much fun to read this book with you guys in this virtual platform. So I'm so glad you stuck it out. I really hope you enjoyed this book as much as I do. It is one of my all-time favorite books to read. So let's get to it. We'll start off with chapter 28, Nancy. Nancy had big hands and big feet. He didn't like his name. He thought it was a girl's name. None of the other children in Miss Jewel's class thought that Nancy's name was odd. They didn't think of it as a girl's name or a boy's name. Nancy was just the name of the quiet kid with big hands and big feet who sat over in the corner next to John. Nancy was very quiet and very shy. He was ashamed of his name. He had only one friend, a girl who went to class on the 23rd story of Wayside School. They were friends for a good reason, too. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. They just called each other, "Hey, you," or just plain you. Nancy was afraid to ask his friends what her name was. Because then he might have to tell her his name. He never could figure out why she never asked, but he was happy just to leave well enough alone. One morning, Nancy and his friend were late. When they got to the 23rd story, his friend's teacher was waiting outside. "Hurry up! You're late, Mac," said the teacher. Nancy's friend turned red. She didn't move. "Come on, Mac, shake a leg." "Get the lead out," said the teacher. "Your name is Mac?" said Nancy. Mac was very pretty. She had red hair and freckles. She covered her face and ran into the room. "My name's Nancy," Nancy called out after her. Mac stepped back outside. "I was ashamed to tell you my name," she said. "Me too," said Nancy. "Nancy's a girl name." "I like the name Mac," said Nancy. "Mac is a boy's name," said Mac. "My mother had a rich aunt named Nancy," said Nancy, "and that's why she gave me the name." "My mother once had a dog named Mac," said Mac. "Hey, do you want to trade?" asked Nancy. "Well, can we?" asked Mac. "Well, I don't know," said Nancy. "I don't see why not." "Okay then," said Mac. They both spun around 100 times in the opposite direction until they were dizzy. Then they fell over. When they stood up, Mac was Nancy and Nancy was Mac. They said goodbye, then Mac raced up to Miss Jewel's room. He was no longer shy. "Hi, everybody. My name is Mac," he announced. "I traded names," and he held out his big old hand. Todd jumped up and shook it. "Hi, Mac," he said. "I'm glad to meet you." "How you doing, Mac?" said Ron. "Howdy, Mac," said Terrence. "Nice to see you, Mac," said BB. "You traded names?" asked Jason. Jason didn't like his name either. "That's right, Jason, old boy," said Mac. "Is that allowed?" asked Jason. "Why not?" said Mac. "Hey, anybody want to trade?" Jason called. "I'll trade with you," said Terrence. He didn't like his name either. "Wait, no, I'll trade with you, Terrence," said Marika. Marika didn't like her name. "No, he's trading with me," said Jason. "I'll trade with you," said Marika. "Marika," said Damon. "No, thanks," said Marika. "I'll trade with you, Damon," said Miss Jewels. "No, I don't want to be Miss Jewels," said Stephen. It turned out nobody in Miss Jewel's class liked their name. The children all spun around in different directions until they got so dizzy they fell over, and then they stood up again, and nobody knew who anybody was. "What are we going to do, Miss Jewels?" asked Leslie. who was really Eric Bacon. My name is not Miss Jules, it's Marika, answered Terrence, who was really Jason. It is not. I'm Marika, said Dee Dee, who was really Joe. You're both wrong, said Marika. I'm Miss Jules. This went on for an hour. At last, they figured out who the real Rondi was. She was missing her 2 front teeth. After they figured out Rondi, they were able to get Allison pretty easy. And then from there, they got DJ, Damien, and Miss Jules. She was the oldest one. Eventually, they figured out who everybody really was. They had some difficulty deciding which Eric was which, and actually, they still weren't absolutely sure. Everybody just decided to keep their own name. The children didn't like them, but it made things a whole lot easier. Mac and Nancy kept their new names, and when they were together, they still call each other Hey You or just plain You. Chapter 29, Stephen. Stephen had green hair, and he had purple ears and a blue face. He wore his sister's pink dancing shoes and green leotards. The leotards matched his hair. He was all dressed up as a goblin for Mrs. Jules' Halloween party. But unfortunately, it wasn't Halloween. Ha, ha, ha. You sure look stupid, said Jason. Jason was Stephen's best friend. So do you, said Stephen. Boy, you are dumb, said Jenny. Halloween's on Sunday. Today's only Friday. You're the one who's dumb, said Stephen. Ha ha. You'll probably come to school on a Sunday. Miss Jules said we'd have the party today. But none of the other children wore their costumes, only Stephen. All right, class, said Miss Jules, it's time for our Halloween party. See, said Stephen. Miss Jules gave each child a cookie, and it looked like an orange witch with a black hat. She laughed when she saw Stephen and forgot to give him one. Stephen didn't ask for it. He was afraid that she would laugh again. The children finished their cookies in less than 30 seconds. All right, class, said Miss Jules, the party is over. We have a lot of work to do. Stephen felt like a fool. The party lasted less than a minute, and he had to spend the rest of the day wearing this stupid goblin suit. Look, Stephen's wearing his sister's leotard, said Dana. They're green, just like his hair, said Fatso. Everybody laughed. Miss Jules began the arithmetic lesson. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 + 1 = 5. That's wrong, said Joy. Miss Jules tried again. 2 + 2 = 3. That wasn't right either. She added 2 and 2 again. She got 43. It was useless. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get 2 + 2 to = 4. I don't understand it, she said. They've always equaled 4 before. Suddenly she screamed, ah! The chalk turned into a squiggly worm. She dropped it on her foot, and then all the lights went out. The blackboard lit up like a movie screen. A woman appeared on the screen. She had a long tongue and pointed ears, and she stepped off the screen and into the classroom. It was the ghost of Miss Gorf! Mrs. Gorf ran her fingernails across the blackboard. Trick or treat, you rotten kids, she said. Now I'll get even with every last one of you. Where is Todd? Who's that? Asked Miss Jules. Mrs. Gorf, said Damien. Well, who's Mrs. Gorf? Said Miss Jules. She was the meanest teacher we ever had, said Rondi. Well, what happened to her? Asked Miss Jules. Louis ate her, said Jason. Well, I'm not going to allow this, said Miss Jules. Get out of my classroom, she demanded. It's Halloween, sweet teacher, said Mrs. Gorf. Ghosts can go anywhere they'd like, and I've come back for a little class reunion. But it isn't Halloween yet, said Miss Jules. Halloween is still 2 days away. Well, I know, said Mrs. Gorf, but Halloween falls on a Sunday this year, so we are celebrating it on the Friday before. Stephen leapt from his seat. See, I was right, he said. Today is the day that we celebrated. It's the Friday before, and Miss Gorf proved it. He ran up to Miss Gorf. They all laughed at me. They made me feel stupid because I was the only one who got dressed up, but they were the ones who were wrong. You and I are right. He put his arms around Miss Gorf and hugged her. Miss Gorf gasped and disappeared. The lights came back on. Mrs. Jules picked up a piece of chalk from the floor. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's good, she said. When 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, anything can happen. All the children who had laughed at Stephen now called him a hero, but they told him to change out of his stupid costume. So at lunch, Stephen went home, washed up, and changed. He came back wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt, and of course, his hair was still green. It always was. Chapter 30, Louis. Louis had a red face and a mustache of many colors. He was the yard teacher at Wayside School. It was his job to see that children didn't have too much fun during lunch and recess. And if you haven't already guessed it, he was the one who wrote this book. On June 10th, there was a blizzard. Louis was afraid that the children would have too much fun, so nobody was allowed outside. Class, said Mrs. Jules, after you finish your lunch today, come back up to the classroom. You are not allowed outside. The children all went to the lunchroom. Miss Mush had made tuna surprise. They looked at it, then they hurried back upstairs. There was nothing to do. Now, class, said Miss Jules, I know that you are bored, but I have a very special surprise for you. Well, I hope it's better than that tuna surprise, said Marika. Mrs. Jules continued. Louis is going to come up and entertain us. He will tell us a story. Now I want all of you to be on your best behavior. When Louis walked in, all the children booed. Are you going to tell a story? Asked Bibi. Yeah, said Louis. Well, it better be a good one, Bibi warned. It better be better than the tuna surprise, said Butterfingers. Well, I thought the tuna surprise was really good, said Louis. You'd eat dirt if they put enough ketchup on it, said Mac. Hey, everybody, be quiet, said Todd. Let him tell the story. Not too loud, Louis, said Sherry. I'm trying to get some sleep here. Louis sat in the middle of the room and all the children gathered around. Louis began his story. This is a story about a school very much like this one, but before we get started, there is something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. In this school, every classroom is on the same story. Which one? Like the 18th? Asked Jenny. No, said Louis. They're all on the ground. The school is only 1 story high. Not much of a school then, laughed Damien. Louis continued. Now, you might think the children there were strange and silly. That is probably true. However, when I told them stories about you, they thought that you were strange and silly too. Us? The children answered. How are we strange? I'm normal, said Stephen. Aren't I? As normal as I am, Joe assured him. The children at the school must be crazy, said Leslie. Real Lulus, said Marika. Tell us about them, Louis, Bibi demanded. Well, for one thing, Louis said, none of these children had ever been turned into apples. Well, that's just silly, said Dee Dee. Everybody's been turned into an apple. It's part of growing up. Louis continued. Dead rats don't walk into their classroom wearing raincoats. Well, what do they wear? Tuxedos? Said Todd. And girls never try to sell their toes, Louis added. Well, no wonder, said Leslie, at today's prices. Louis continued. They don't trade names or read upside down. They can't turn mosquito bites into numbers. They don't count the hairs on their head. The walls don't laugh, and 2 + 2 always equals 4. How horrible, said Damien. That's not the worst of it, said Louis. They have never tasted Marika-flavored ice cream. A hush fell over the room. Miss Jules, I'm scared, said Allison. Is there really a school like that? Of course not, said Miss Jules. Louis was just telling a story. It was a good story, said Leslie. Well, I thought it was stupid, said Kathy. I liked it, said Rondi. It was funny. Miss Jules said, Louis, it was a very entertaining story, but we really don't go for fairy tales around here. I'm trying to teach my class about the truth. Well, that's all right, said Louis. I have to go down to room 29 now and tell them the story. He started out the door. Class, said Miss Jules, let's all thank Louis for his wonderful story. Everybody booed. All right, guys, that's it. That was the final chapter. I'm going to read you a little bit about the author, Louis Sachar. He was born in East Meadow, New York. When he was in high school, he wrote his first children's story. It was about a mean teacher named Mrs. Gorf, who turned her students into apples. In college, Louis worked as a playground supervisor at Hillside Elementary School. Koa, no. Dogs, I tell you. At Hillside Elementary School in Northern California, the kids called him Louis the Yard Teacher. The characters in this book are named after the students Louis met at Hillside. Louis graduated from law school in 1980, but he writes books instead of practicing law because it's what he really likes to do. So I encourage you, that's one of the reasons I love this book, is I encourage you to find something you love to do and think about how one day down the road you can either make a career out of it or just find a way to do it in your daily life. And if you, just grow and be whatever you want to be. I'm so proud of you. I really hope you loved this book. And there's actually a brand new book that I have not read yet, and it is by the same author, and this just came out this year, and I'm so excited to read this one next. So thanks for listening, guys. I really hope you enjoyed Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Get out there, learn, have fun. I'll see you soon.